All right, good morning. My preview just started playing an ad, so it looked a little funny. Good morning, everybody, or good evening, wherever you are in the world. As with all these streams, if you would like to put where you are in the world, it's always interesting to see where people are coming from. I just realized my camera's pointed a little off, so I'm going to move over a little bit. I've been working on some Turing Pi video work lately, and because of that I've had to move around all my cameras and things, and I'm a little bit disjointed in here. Also, because today's episode is going to talk about Windows, I have set up my Windows PC here. I'm going to be remoting into it through a remote desktop connection for some of the presentation. And so I had to rearrange my desk, which right now is a huge mess. You can't see this area over here, but it is a huge mess because I'm working on not only the Turing Pi cluster, but also a couple other interesting new projects that I hope to be sharing soon. One of them involving the high quality camera module, using it for some astrophotography, and also using it for some time-lapse photography. I just got it in last week, so playing around with that, testing it. So if you're interested in all that stuff, please consider subscribing to the channel, and also if you're interested in me doing that kind of stuff on an ongoing basis, please consider supporting me on GitHub sponsors or on Patreon. The links are in the description below. And also I'd like to thank in a special way the people who are supporting me as of this week. In the past few days have started supporting me on GitHub, which is Neil Johnson, Joss Hoekstra, Brandon Luna, Monolith Projects, Michael Moransky, and DY, which is, I liked the little logo, it's HP upside down. And also Michael on Patreon. It helps a ton, and there was just an interesting article on Hacker News yesterday about somebody who's able to do a lot of work and get enough sponsorship through Patreon and GitHub to be able to do that work full time. My end goal is to be able to do open source work and educational work like this full time. However, I have a slight difference from the person who's making all that money. I would like to do this and have everything that I do be open and free from the get-go, instead of having something like I have like if I did the streaming series only for sponsors, and then later on if I reach a certain goal I would open it up. I don't want to be like that. My whole life I've enjoyed sharing everything I do free forever. So anybody who supports me is able to help support that mission. Anyways, Aaron says, fantastic for the 33,000 subscribers. Like I said earlier this year, I had like 3,000 subscribers before I started the Ansible 101 live streams. And now I'm up to 33,000. My goal this year was to try to get to 5,000 subscribers. So I kind of blew that away, and that really made me think more about doing more of these series. So I'm going to have some more news about that towards the end of this episode. But today's episode is talking about Ansible on Windows. And it's funny, so full disclosure, I am not a Windows primarily developer. I have used Windows my whole life. My first, if you notice the screen, the loading screen here, that's not what I was talking about. Anyway, the screen for, like the thumbnail for this video had the old Windows 3.1 logo. The first machine that I ever used in computing was an old DOS 6.0 running 386, and I upgraded the RAM. I think I put 8 megabytes of RAM over the years into that thing, and I was able to run Doom on it, and I got Windows 3.1, and that was kind of my first computer that I really used. I put it together from parts my dad had brought home from where he worked, and kind of got it running, and it was fun. I also got my first electrical shock working inside of it. It was only 12 volts, so it wasn't quite deadly or anything, but I was touching the wrong part of the motherboard and realized, don't touch that part of the motherboard. Anyways, and I didn't have an ESD wristband on at that time. So anyways, I've had a lot of history with Windows, but I've never used it as my primary OS once I started doing work on computers full time. I've used Linux here and there for short stints in the past, but I've mostly been a Mac guy. And that's because a lot of my background is more in design and web development, things like that. And I do a lot of media work. but I haven't done as much until the past decade or so, as much with sysadmin type work. So anyway, that's a lot of background just to say that I am not a primarily Windows developer. Some of the advice I give in this particular episode might be good to look in the live chat for people who might actually know more than me about Windows and using it with Ansible. But the first segment of this episode I wanted to get into was how to install Ansible. If you're running Windows, specifically Windows 10, you can install the Windows subsystem for Linux, and that's the way that I do things. I just find it easier because it's basically running Ubuntu or Debian or whatever your favorite distribution is. It's basically running that inside of Windows fairly seamlessly, not exactly seamlessly, but it works well enough. And for most Ansible usage, it works great. I don't have any problems using SSH to connect to servers in that environment. And with Windows Subsystem for Linux 2, some of the little annoying bugs have been fixed, but there's some other ones that I'll talk about later. But one funny thing that happened was I pre-recorded this next segment just because it's one of those things where I don't want to try to do it on the live stream and spend 45 minutes on it because I forgot something, because I don't do this every day. And once you set it up, you probably won't do it every day either. But I ran into this fun situation because this Dell laptop I have, I really use it for gaming and for mostly testing. So when I want to test something that I do in Ansible on Windows, when I want to test one of my Drupal projects on Windows, I'll do it on this laptop. And I booted it up. I usually boot it up once a month or so. And it had been like 60 days since the last boot up. So of course, while I was recording this thing, two separate times, it rebooted itself for Windows updates. And that's always a fun thing that I don't enjoy on Windows. But anyway, I'm going to show you this pre-recorded segment, which will allow me to look at live chat. So if you have anything fun to say in there, I could actually respond to you for the next few minutes. But here is how I installed Ansible under Windows Subsystem for Linux 2 using Ubuntu and the bash program that you get with that. So there's a few different ways that you can run Ansible on Windows. And with Windows 10, if you're using the latest version and you can get Windows Subsystem for Linux 2, my favorite way is using WSL2. And to install it, you need to go to this guide page and copy these commands to set it up. So I'm going to grab this command, and it says open PowerShell as administrator. There it is. Let me open it as administrator. You can see also I have my wonderful games that I normally play on this Windows laptop there. But I'm going to open up PowerShell and then paste this command right here and run it. That's going to install the Windows subsystem for Linux onto my computer. And then I need to make sure that it's running WSL2, so I need to make sure that the virtual machine platform component is enabled. So I'm going to copy that and paste it here. And for those not familiar with Windows, you can right-click to paste. There's other ways as well. Anyways, so let's see. I also want to make sure it uses WSL2 by default because there's some nice things in WSL2 that allow Ansible to run a little better. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and it's not working. Why is that? Hold on just a moment as I pause this and figure out what's going on. I didn't read the rest of the instructions here. I need to restart my machine, so hold on for a moment as I reboot this computer, and I can finish off the rest of this. Let's see. Restart. All right, so got rebooted, and let me open up the guide that I was just working from again, and I'm going to open up PowerShell again as administrator. And of course, yes, I want to allow that. Of course, the Chrome has lost the history where I was. Let's go back to there. You can tell that I don't use Windows daily because I don't have all my preferences set up in all my browser and desktop and all that. Anyways, so I rebooted the machine, and now I want to set the default version. Hopefully this works this time. I'm going to copy that. There we go. All right, let's see, requires an update to its kernel component, so I'll have to go to this URL. I will have to install this extra thing here. Whoops. I actually wanted to go to that, but I'll go ahead and paste it in here. So I'll need to download this right here. and install it. And I don't know why it hit itself. Okay, next. Yes, I do want to allow that. Oh, this is Killer Performance Driver Suite. I'm not sure what that means, but okay. I don't really like Killer Performance Driver Suite, wherever that is. Sure, I will undo those changes. Hopefully this PC does not have some malware all of a sudden. I really don't use it for almost anything except for playing a couple games which are installed locally on the computer. Anyways, it looks like it's finished. All right. Now let's go back here and see if we can get this to run this time. Paste. Okay, that's good. And then I need to install a Linux distribution. So I'm going to go to the Microsoft Store, which opens the separate app, and make sure that I have Ubuntu installed. You can choose other Linux distributions, and something like Debian would work pretty much the same as Ubuntu. But I usually run Ubuntu on Windows just because it seems like it has the most support. And all right, so it finally installed Ubuntu. I was having some weird difficulty. It seems like because I used to have it installed a while back under Windows Subsystem for Linux 1, it had some trouble. I had to reinstall it a couple times. I actually paused the video, did that a few times, and now it looks like it might actually be installed. So I'm going to go, I could launch it from there, but I'm going to go into the Start menu, and or whatever this is called nowadays, the Windows menu, and find where it is in here. There it is. It's installed just like a normal app, but the first time that you run it, I'm going to go ahead and close Microsoft Store. The first time you run it, it sets things up. It expands a disk image into the VM environment that it's running for Ubuntu, and then it makes you create a user account. So I'm going to do that. And now I am running an Ubuntu machine inside of WSL. Now there's some peculiarities with this, and I'll talk about them in just a minute. But the first thing I'm going to do is update the apt caches. So sudo apt-get update, and that's going to, well, let me type in my password. That's going to make sure that all the installation packages have the latest metadata. Since we're going to use it to install pip, we're going to install pip onto Ubuntu via apt so that we have Python 3 pip, which we'll then use to install Ansible. So I'm going to say sudo apt-get install -y pip Python 3 pip, and that is going to install pip, and then I can use pip once it's installed to install Ansible. Now there's something that's a little odd about the environment here. In its bash profile setup, the default setup that you have, it actually loads the path where pip installs Ansible by default. However, it doesn't load it the first time you open up this Ubuntu app, because it looks for a .local folder and a bin folder inside there the first time that you run it, and it doesn't find that, so it doesn't add that path to your system path in Ubuntu. So after we install Ansible, I'm actually going to have to quit Ubuntu and then start it again. So I'll say pip3 install Ansible, and pip is by default going to download the latest version of Ansible, which for this particular video is 2.9.10. It's probably going to be a different version when you're seeing this, unless you're seeing it on June 24th, 2020, when this live stream episode is going out. But it's going to install that, and it's going to put it into the path my home directory /.local/bin, and I'll show you /.local/bin, and it installs all the different Ansible binaries in there. But if I try running Ansible --version, it says it cannot be found, and it's going to suggest installing it with apt. Don't do that, because you don't get the latest version of Ansible that way unless you set up the Ansible PPA, which I'm not going to cover in this video because I like using pip to install it. So the fix for that is to exit and then go back in and run Ubuntu again, and that will reload the bash profile setup. And now if I say Ansible --version, and we'll see it, because if I say echo path, the path that I have is updated to include that .local directory somewhere in here. I don't see it. There it is. it adds this local directory in the path, which is where Ansible is located. So now I have Ansible installed, and I can start using Ansible to do ad hoc tasks, to do whatever. And the next things that I'll need to do is set up my SSH key if I have one, so that I can work with a Git repository and download things and synchronize things, and so that I can log into other servers through this Linux environment. Another interesting thing is that you can actually call out to Windows binaries. You might notice in this path that there's paths like /mnt/c. If I look at all the disks I can see, this path right here is a mount of my C drive in Windows. So if I say cd/mnt/c, and then look inside of here, you can see all the Windows files. So you can access the Windows files from Ubuntu or bash.exe, and you can also access the Ubuntu files from Windows. One thing to keep in mind is when you do that, the file system access is kind of through a virtualized boundary. So you might have some performance issues if you have lots and lots of small files, like if you're running applications through there. However, with Ansible, that's usually not much of a concern, even if you have your files in the Windows file system and you access them from Ubuntu Bash. Like, say, for instance, you're using the Git Bash environment in Windows to manage your Git repositories, and you want to access them through Ubuntu. So anyway, we have Windows Subsystem for Linux 2 installed on Windows 10. This is running the Windows 10 2004, not the year 2004, but the 2004 version of Windows 10, which allows you to run WSL2. And then we installed Ubuntu on it, and now we have Ansible, Ansible 2.9.10 running, and now we can start doing automation inside of our Windows environment. All right, so that was getting Ansible installed inside WSL2 on Windows 10, and it works pretty much the same if you can't update yet to Windows 2004, which is not Windows 2004, but Windows version 2004. The numbering scheme is really confusing me now because we're getting into like current events, and I think what was 2004 was Windows 7 or Windows XP still? I don't remember. Anyways, the point of it is that you can install Ansible either under WSL 1 or 2. I just am using WSL 2 because it has a few other optimizations that make it run a little bit better in Windows 10. I want to get to actually using it now. And I wanted to talk a little bit especially about using the Ansible for DevOps examples. So this repository on GitHub has a bunch of the examples, and I just realized that the new GitHub is really throwing me off. The new GitHub design is up and live, and it's a lot different, that's for sure. But anyway, there's a bunch of examples from the book in here, and in the table of contents it has what chapter each example goes to. And for example, this Node.js example comes with a Vagrant file, and that allows you to use Vagrant. And if you're on a Mac or Linux computer, you can just run Vagrant up and everything is done, and it works great. On Windows, the problem is that you can't run an Ansible provisioner inside of PowerShell, because Ansible, technically speaking, it could work. And I have actually gotten Ansible to run and do things, but it doesn't really work that well. And SSH is kind of a disaster inside of PowerShell right now. That may change in the future. But anyway, the point of that is that it's impossible right now to get these Vagrant configurations to run inside of PowerShell in Windows. So a lot of people ask, well, can I just run it in WSL2? Well, there's some complications there. You can see that I actually did get it running. This is my Ubuntu Bash environment. I actually got it running inside of this environment. One really funny thing that I noticed, there's a bug with the font, apparently. The default font for Ubuntu Bash is Consolas, and if you use this font, and I had it set like this, and if you say like Vagrant status, if you use that font and run any Vagrant command, Vagrant actually outputs some character. I don't remember what character it is. It outputs some character that throws Ubuntu Bash into this like raster old school font mode. And so the fix for that right now is to switch to Lucida Console, because that font apparently has the right characters and Consolas does not, or something like that. Anyways, just a fun peculiarity that I found. But I can get this working. I have to tell you that it's not just click a button and you're done. There's a few different things you have to do to get this to work. First of all, you have to install VirtualBox in Windows. And VirtualBox does work now if you use VirtualBox 6.1 or later. VirtualBox works in Windows with Hyper-V enabled. There can be some weird things that happen. You might also need to edit your system's BIOS or its whatever the system is. You might have to tweak it to turn on VTX virtualization support. Some laptops especially don't have that turned on by default. So after you do all that, VirtualBox should be able to run. But you install that in Windows, and then you install Vagrant actually in Ubuntu Bash. And you can't just say sudo apt-get install Vagrant, because that's going to install a really old version of Vagrant. Instead, you have to install a version that you download from vagrantup.com, whatever the latest version is. I think it's 2.2.9 right now. You have to download that and put it into something that's in your system path. I actually have some notes about that in the repository. I think it's under here. If you want to get into all the nitty-gritty details, downloading it and putting it into the right place, then you have to also set this variable in the Ubuntu Bash environment to make sure that Vagrant knows that it's running under WSL and can run in Windows. And eventually you can run it, but what I found is it doesn't actually control the networking correctly through Ubuntu Bash in WSL2. It might work in WSL1, but WSL1 has its own peculiarities. So what I found that I had to do to get this all to work is I had to also install Vagrant. So I have it installed in Ubuntu, the Bash environment here. And then I also had to install Vagrant in the Windows environment. And then I went into one of the examples, so this is the Node.js example, and then I ran Vagrant up from Windows, and that creates the network connections correctly. And then I went back over here, because in Windows you can see here it says Windows is not officially supported for the Ansible control machine because Ansible doesn't run that well under PowerShell. So I went back over here, and I had to make a couple modifications because Vagrant by default will connect over localhost, and localhost is on a different network if you're in Ubuntu versus the Windows environment. And there may be ways to make that work a little better, but I had to, I had to create an inventory file, which is not necessary if you're on a Mac or Linux, but I had to create an inventory file, and that inventory file points to the host IP address that is set up so that it doesn't try connecting over localhost. And then it forces the user Vagrant. And then also I had to copy the private key file out of the Windows environment into the Linux file system, because if you try doing this using the Windows copy of the key, in the Windows file system, everything is seen as 777 from Linux. And so if you try using that key, then SSH will be like, you can't use that key. The permissions are way too open. So I had to copy the key into the Linux environment, and then I changed its permissions to 600, so only my user can see the private key. And then I can actually run Vagrant provision. And then I found another fun thing is that if you run Vagrant provision 20 times, maybe 12 or so times out of that 20, there will be some random weird error. And I haven't tracked that down yet. One time it said like the Ansible module utils was gone, and I'm like, I don't know why that would happen. And it was always a random task that it would happen on. Other times it would say that Git could not confirm a SHA hash. Other times when npm was installing it couldn't confirm a file hash. So I'm thinking that there's probably two layers of potential issues when you're doing things through WSL2 and also WSL1. Sometimes I would have these kind of issues. Like here, this one is saying, randomly, there's a struct error, integer out of range for L format code. Every time I do this, I see some new weird problem. And if I do it 2 times, it won't show me the same problem. So there's got to be some issue with networking or file system boundaries or something like that that's going on here. Because what we're doing, and the reason why some of these things are complicated, is we're running Windows. So this is not virtualized on my Mac. This is actually this. Let me switch over here. I'm RDPing into this laptop. So it's actually running on a laptop. It's not like 4 layers of virtualization. But I'm running a VirtualBox VM that's managed using Vagrant inside of Windows, and I'm connecting to it through WSL2. So there's a lot of different virtualized networking layers going on, and I think that's the problem. So you can see this, we have another error, and this one is saying no module named Ansible module utils. I don't know why exactly all this is happening. I've been debugging it. You might notice in the next video, you'll just see in the next video what time it is. So it's complicated, I guess, is what I'm saying. You can get it to work, and if you spend a little more time with it, you might be able to figure out some of the reasons. Like this time, we got SFTP transfer mechanism failed. Didn't get that last time. I don't know. It's a little crazy. There's every time that this stuff comes up on Hacker News or on Reddit or something, people are like, oh, it's so great, Windows subsystem for Linux. It's like you're running Linux on your Windows machine. And it's like, have you actually tried it? Have you run applications in it? So far I've never had the experience that I have running on a Windows machine or on a Linux machine or on my Mac, where everything just works and you don't hit these random errors. There are always random errors with software development, don't get me wrong. But Windows subsystem for Linux is very far from perfect and seamless. That's my experience. Now, granted, I do more complicated things than a lot of people who might just install Node.js and run a Node.js app. But even that can have a lot of complications. Anyway, so this time it actually all worked. The playbook ran through completely. And if I go to, just like in the book example, if I go to that URL in Chrome on the Windows machine, and paste, my fingers, the keyboard memory, hitting Control instead of Command is always fun for the day when you're switching between Mac and Windows. Anyways, it's working, so that's good. That means that the deployment worked. But like I said, it gets a little bit complicated. So would I recommend selling a Mac and going and buying a Windows PC to run examples that are in Ansible for DevOps? Probably not. If you're using Windows, this is an option. There's probably other ways to do this. One thing that you can also do is cat vagrant file. So in this vagrant file, you could, instead of using the Ansible provisioner, you can use the Ansible local provisioner, which will copy the playbook into the VM, and then you could actually run it from PowerShell doing it that way. I actually do that with some of my other Vagrant configurations. I don't do that for the Ansible for DevOps examples, mostly because I try to make these examples work without Vagrant entirely, if you want to do it that way too. Or if you want to swap in any other kind of virtualization, you can do that. These examples are meant to be starting off points. They're not meant to be like, this is the only way you can do it. So just keep that in mind. Matt is saying, is this WSL2 original? And Mike mentioned, yes, it's WSL2. Each version has its own peculiarities that I've found. And WSL2 improves on some things. It's more consistent, which is good. But there's still some, what I would consider weird bugs that I encounter in it. And I usually try to document all those things. So I've had all these issues and actually posted an issue upstream. Where is it? I posted an issue in Vagrant's repository, and I might or might not post an issue or two in WSL2 about this. Mostly I like to do that because whenever I'm working on these issues and trying to figure out what's going on, if I don't put my information, like here's what I did, out on the web, then I'm not really advancing the state of our global knowledge about how this works. So there might actually be a solution for this, and somebody might know it, and they could pop in here and post it. And then when somebody Googles any of these terms that I have been talking about, or any of the error messages that pop up, then they'll get to this page and figure out that solution. So that's one thing that I like to do, and in any of the development that I do. And that's another reason why I love open source, is because I have these problems with proprietary software, and I have these problems with open source software. With proprietary software, you usually end up in a black hole, and there's no way you can see to fix it, or you can't really converse with other people because the code is not open, and the repositories and the issue trackers and things are often not open. So you end up having the same problems, and you end up not being able to ever figure out how to fix them. With open source software, at least you can see that other people have the same problem, even if you can never fix the problem. All right, so we talked a bit about Vagrant, and running Ansible playbooks under WSL2 is the same as running them under any Linux environment. So now that I have Ansible here, I can run Ansible and use SSH connections from this machine out to other machines, just like I do on my Mac. So I'm not going to get into details and run a bunch of playbooks or anything like that. But I can in this environment, clone down Git repositories, connect to servers, connect to bastions, connect to AWS, do whatever I want, because this is full Linux, although with caveats. Like I said, sometimes I ran into these weird networking and file system issues. Some of that's due to the fact that in this particular case, I'm running on the C drive. This is, as I mentioned in that video earlier, this is a mount of the C drive that I'm running inside of, and that's because Vagrant requires that for some weird issue with the file system sharing or something like that. You can also try running this stuff from within the Linux file system, and that may or may not help with some of the issues I'm having. But that's just something to keep in mind. Where you're located on the file system can also dictate how things work. Anyways, so that's WSL in Windows 10. And in the book, I actually have a copy of the book with me. In the book, I have an appendix that's on Windows. You have to note that I wrote this appendix, I think, in 2014. That was before WSL was even in existence. So the current appendix, it has a solution that can work. You can set up a VirtualBox VM and do it in there. This is basically doing the same thing, but it's using the native WSL instead, which makes it a little faster, a little easier. And you don't even need to install VirtualBox if you don't want to use Ansible in Windows. So that sums up using Ansible in Windows. And I'm hoping to update that appendix to use this method and recommend this method, since WSL2 is now a fully supported feature of Windows. For the past few months, you'd had to be on the Windows Insider ring, meaning you had to join the Windows Insider program and basically run beta software on your laptop to run this. And I would never recommend people do that. If you're on the Insider ring, you might know about things like the fact that your home directory could have been deleted due to one of the updates, and there's just a lot more buggy things that can happen. You shouldn't run beta software on your main machine almost ever. I've done it once or twice when I really needed a feature or really needed to build for something, but beta software is not all that fun to have to run just to use one feature like WSL2. So the second part of this video, and I'm kind of amazed that I hit the 10:30 mark or 11:30 or whatever 30 it is in your time zone, or if you have a 15-minute or 30-minute increment, it's not actually 30 minutes after the hour. But the second part of this is talking about managing Windows machines using Ansible. And this is something you can do from Linux, from Mac, or from Windows. You can use any type of host, assuming Windows is using WSL2, so you can run Ansible in it. You can manage Windows machines from any of these servers. So you can use a tower instance that's running in Linux and manage Windows machines with it, because Ansible uses different connection mechanisms for Windows. And there's actually a couple different ways you can do it. And I guess I'll get into the next little pre-recorded video here. And again, I pre-recorded this because of the fact that since I don't do this setup every day, I know that I would screw something up and we'd spend 10 minutes just going around trying to copy a folder into the right path or something crazy like that. So I recorded this, and you'll see that this was kind of under the wire last night. So here is that segment. There are a few different ways you can set up connections to Windows from Ansible. And one of the traditional ways to do it is to use WinRM, but since I am a bit more familiar with SSH, and since Windows 10 and the latest versions of Windows Server now support running OpenSSH, although it's a new feature, so it's probably not going to be available everywhere, I'm going to use the Windows SSH method for connecting to my Windows workstation. And all you need to do basically is install this Win32 OpenSSH project on your Windows machines, and after you do that, it's pretty much the same as connecting to any other SSH host, with a couple small differences, obviously, because it's Windows and not Linux. So there's an install guide on the Win32 OpenSSH wiki, and the install guide basically tells you to download the latest version and then run an installer. So to get the link to the latest version, I'm going to go to this wiki page and copy out the installation setup for OpenSSH Win64. So I'm going to copy that and open a PowerShell window and paste it in. And then go ahead and grab this URL and download this file. It wants me to download the file and extract the contents into the folder program files / OpenSSH. So I'm going to go ahead and download that file here, open it up. I'm going to copy this folder out and go to the C:/program files and paste it into here. And I'll go ahead and allow that to happen. And then I'm going to rename this folder to just OpenSSH. Now I also need to relaunch PowerShell or open up PowerShell as administrator so that I have permissions to be able to install this thing. So I'm going to go into C:/, and I know that CD is not the proper technical way to do it on Windows, but since PowerShell aliases that to dir, I will, or into whatever the command is in Windows, I can just do it here. So I'm going to go to C:/, let me go back to this page, C:/program files / OpenSSH, and then run this installation command right here. And that's going to install it. Now that it's installed, I also need to open the firewall port. And since I'm running a client desktop machine, Windows 10, I can run this command to open up my firewall on my machine so that it lets SSH activity go through. And that just outputs OK. So I guess that means it's OK. Then I need to start the service. So I'll take that and run it. And it looks like it started successfully. And then I also want to make sure that it's running on boot up so that I can always manage this machine even if I reboot it. So I'm going to do that. Now at this point, SSH should be running. So if I go over to my Mac and I try connecting SSH, Geerling is my account name, and let's get the IP address. I think it's ifconfig. IPconfig. IFG. IP address is on Windows, they're on Linux. What is it? If IPconfig. There it is. Okay, so the IP address for this workstation is 10.0.100.112. And if I try connecting, Geerling at 10.0.100.12 and put in my Windows user account password, I am now logged in as my user on this Windows laptop via SSH, and that's pretty cool. Now, one thing to keep in mind is the defaults will actually use the command cmd.exe for your shell. So if you try doing those things that I was doing in PowerShell, like saying ls for listing the directory, it's going to say that that's not recognized because that's a PowerShell alias to dir, which won't work unless you're actually in PowerShell. So that's something that you could set up. I'm not going to cover that in this video. But at this point, we can connect via SSH. And so if we can do that, Ansible should be able to control this computer by SSH. So I have this project set up here, and it has a typical Ansible an inventory file that has one server, which is this PC that I have in my room here. And there's two important things that you have to tell Ansible about. One is the Ansible connection, which in this case is SSH. That makes sure that even though it sees it as a Windows computer, it's going to use SSH because that's the way that we're connecting to it. And we want to make sure that Ansible knows what kind of shell to try to use. You could change this to PowerShell if you were using that on the Windows side and had that set up in the OpenSSH settings. Anyway, so we have this host file, and there's an ansible.cfg file that basically tells Ansible where to look for that host file. So I can run Ansible, and then I'll say Windows to operate on all the servers in this Windows group, which is just one, and then give it a module. And for Linux hosts, we would use the ping module, but if we do that on Windows, this module won't actually work. There's a lot of modules that are written more for like Linux and POSIX environments, and they don't work with Windows because of the different protocols and ways that Windows works with files and file systems. So instead of that, I'm going to use the Win ping module. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that long term, this might change actually and be something like ansible.windows.ping. But for now, it's all these modules that are specific for Windows are like win ping. And then I'm also going to say ask pass because I haven't set up an authorized keys file on the Windows machine yet. But you can do that just the same as SSH anywhere else. You can use private keys and things like that. But I'm going to have it ask for my password. I'm going to put my Windows user account password in, and it looks like Ansible can successfully connect to this server just like it can to any other server running SSH. So that's the way that I like to connect to Windows. But like I've said before, I'm not like the Windows expert, and I don't manage fleets of Windows machines. So your mileage may vary there, and you might also not even be allowed to set up OpenSSH on your Windows servers. And in that case, you might want to use WinRM, or if there's any other ways to connect, you can do that. Anyways, back to me, I guess, because I'm doing this live stream and I just pre-recorded this video and I am now talking to myself.
See, here I'm now by myself, talking to myself.
All right, so that is how you can get OpenSSH running on Windows. And as I mentioned in the video, there's a lot of the modules, pretty much all the modules that Ansible originally came with were not written with Windows in mind. And I think early on in the life cycle of adding Windows support to Ansible, the decision was made to not try to make all the modules like file and copy and all those things, not make those modules be like split-brained and have a ton of code for the POSIX and Linux environment, and then also have a ton of code for the Windows environment. So instead of doing that, all these modules were created, the Windows modules you see on this page, and basically a lot of them are the same as they are for Mac or Linux, but they're just prefixed with Win. So there's a say module that can use text-to-speech on my Mac, which I sometimes use to fun effect. But for Windows, it's win_say, and there's win_shell, and there's win_stat. So a lot of the modules that we've used and all the other examples that we've done so far work similarly, if not identically, on Windows. It's just you're not going to have the same kind of things like when you copy files to Windows hosts. No, that's going to be a word that I mess up. It doesn't have some of the options like owner and group and things, because file permissions work differently on Windows than they do on Linux and POSIX-y types of file systems. So somebody also earlier mentioned about managing Windows machines using Choco or Chocolatey, and there are some modules for that already in Ansible, WinChocolatey, and all these different modules. You might notice that the video that I played a few minutes ago was recorded at 11:30 or so last night. I was planning on getting a little bit more stuff done and having a full kind of setup playbook, kind of like I do for my Mac Dev playbook, which Mac Dev playbook, that's the license file. This Mac Dev playbook is what I actually use to set up my Mac laptop. It installs all the software, it configures configurations for Sublime Text and Vim and all the dot files and things. So I was planning on setting up at least a basic structure for that, but I kind of ran out of time because I was having so much trouble with getting Vagrant to run, and I finally found that hacky workaround that I have that gets it to work sometimes. But I didn't get time to set up a full playbook that shows it. But at a very basic level, an Ansible playbook is an Ansible playbook. You give it in one play, you have hosts, and I have Windows because that's the group that I have in the inventory file. And then you use modules just like you would with any other Ansible playbook. And you can copy files. Apparently you can even defrag. That was one of my favorite pastimes back in the early Windows 95 days. Whenever you had a slow volume, on your 80 megabyte hard drive IDE or SCSI or whatever, you would run the defrag on it and watch those little squares move around until it was so nice and orderly. People with mild borderline OCD, which I probably have something like that, we just would love that because you see all the disarray and then it kind of puts itself all together and then it's so much happier. I believe you can still, I guess you can still defrag. I haven't defragged this laptop ever. I don't think it's as necessary anymore, but I think you can still do that nowadays. But anyway, there's modules for all these things. And I believe Ansible Windows collection, let me look this up. Let's see. Here we go, Ansible collections. So there's a new Windows collection here. And I think that the collection is still using the prefix, like it's, so instead of, if you're using this collection of Windows modules, you would formerly use Ansible, let's see, Ansible Windows-M winping ask pass. And then you might also hear some weird sounds coming from above me, although it's not spatial, so you wouldn't know that it's above or below or anything. But my kids are playing with marbles. They have Marble Works out upstairs, and I just, all day for the past couple of days, just all these marbles dropping. My brain is about to explode. Anyway, so in the past or in the present, and if you're using Ansible, the main community distribution, it'll still work this way for at least some time in the future. You can just call it like this. If you're using this Ansible Windows collection, if you have this installed separately, you would call ansible.windows.winping. I think at some point, I'll enter that again. I should really set up a key. And I don't have that collection installed, so obviously it's not going to find it. At some point in the future, I believe that the goal is to get these all aliased so that this would be like the old module name, but the new one would just be ansible.windows.ping, and you would run it like that. So long term, it might be like that. For now, you can just use winping like this, and it'll work. Or in your playbook, use it like this. And as I mentioned, the collections episode, I don't remember if that was last episode or whatever, time has kind of run into itself as we're in week 14 or 15 or something of this lockdown time. And since I have I'm on immunosuppressants, I'm kind of locked down until things are a lot more settled down. So wear your masks. Anyway, so in that episode, I talked about collections. You could also, if you wanted to use the collection module and you didn't want to type in ansible.windows.winping, you could put in collections ansible.windows, assuming that you have this collection installed, and then you could do that, and it would use that collection module too. So anyways, like I said, I wanted to have a little bit more of an example of a full Windows playbook that does a lot of different settings. But the main point of this is that with Windows, a lot of the things that you do are the same as you'd do in the Linux environment. It's just most of the modules are prefixed with Win, and I'd say that all the modules, except for maybe 2 or 3 that I use, work great in Windows, and just the same as they do on Linux. It's just obviously you have to have a different mindset because the file system is different. The way that PowerShell works is different. You can run PowerShell scripts. A lot of people end up doing a lot of that for kind of glue work in the Windows environment. And somebody also asked in the live stream earlier about joining, like controlling through the domain and joining with LDAP and things like that. Those things are things that I will not be covering because, like I said, I am not a Windows expert at all. I use it a good amount, mostly to play Halo. Because I don't have any other device. I sold my Xbox 360 like 8 or 9 years ago. So that is literally the only way that I can play Halo anymore. So it's kind of fun to play it there. But I don't manage a lot of Windows machines. The last time I did that was a couple years ago. I helped migrate some stuff off of IIS into an Apache environment. So I am definitely not the expert to talk to. There are experts that you can talk to, and if you have a Red Hat support contract, I would definitely talk to Red Hat support and ask them about specific questions and problems you have. And I believe that there's an Ansible Windows IRC, Ansible Windows IRC. I believe that there's an IRC channel, Ansible Windows. So if you wanted to join that channel, you can ask specific questions in there as well. And there's more information than documentation. This is actually an old one. This is from Ansible 2.4, so it's far out of date. But there's other guides in here that teach you more about using Ansible, some of the things that you'll have to keep in mind, and how to do a lot of different things with managing Windows machines and running Ansible on Windows. So I think that's all that I have for this particular episode, but I did want to say a few things about the next episode. So you might remember that I started the series, I don't remember when it was. It's been a long time. We're on episode 14 today, so it's been 14 weeks. I guess that's an easy way to remember how long I've basically been holed up in my house. The next episode will be the final episode of the Ansible 101 series. There's a couple things that are in this book, Ansible for DevOps, that I have not covered, particularly Docker and Kubernetes and some of the more advanced examples like the elk monitoring stack, things like that. And the reason I'm not covering those is because those are things that don't translate as easily into a 1 hour episode of Ansible 101. And I really don't want to, I also need to take a break. When I started this, I was doing 2 live streams a week, 2 1 hour long live streams a week. And that was kind of killing me. So this is still a little bit stressful. And I want to finish off some other work that I'm doing for other YouTube videos. So there will be a follow-up. This will not be Ansible 101. What I'm thinking is I'm going to do something on Kubernetes. And if you have suggestions for things that you'd want to really see, it would be starting more from like, here's how to use Docker and or Podman, and here's how containers work, and then getting into Kubernetes, and then getting into automating Kubernetes with Ansible, that sort of thing, kind of following the book that I do not have a physical copy of yet because it's not finished, which is Ansible for Kubernetes. There's a link to it. I don't think there's a link to it in the description, but there's a link to it anywhere. Just Google Ansible for Kubernetes. So I'm probably going to be working on that sometime soon. So if you want to see that, if you want to see other things, please hit subscribe below me. It's right below my little video box here. And also, if you want to see more content, please go over to GitHub sponsors or Patreon and sponsor me. That's definitely the best way to make sure that I am motivated, because if I can't earn enough revenue to be able to do this stuff and still support my family and things like that, then I won't be able to do as much. But for next week's episode, it's going to be the final episode. I am going to do kind of a Q&A. Usually at the beginning of these episodes, today I didn't do it just because I wanted to make sure I had time. Usually I cover some questions and answers from the previous live stream. And next week, I'm just going to cover some of the general questions I've heard and also any questions that you might have. I have a Google form set up here, and it doesn't require an email address or anything. You can optionally add your email address if you want to be added to the Ansible for DevOps mailing list, but you don't have to. I don't really care about that. I really just want to get some questions for the next episode. And there will be one special surprise based on questions. I'm not going to say exactly what my criteria is, but somebody will be getting this copy of the book and maybe some other thing or two. I don't know what else I can throw in the box. Definitely some open source stickers. But obviously there's no purchase necessary. Just ask a question about Ansible. And I think you can submit multiple questions. I don't think I restricted it. But this book is a collector's edition because it has all of my scribbles in it, I guess. So, and also I need to replace it with a newer copy. This is version 1.20, I think, and we're up to 1.23 now. So, and I'll be on 1.24 very soon because I'm working on the new chapter 7 that I talked about last week on collections. I'm working on rewriting the tower chapter. I'm working on rewriting the Ansible Windows guide in the appendix. And the sad thing about this all is that on Amazon, they don't allow me to update the published date for the paperback book. So it still says it was published in 2015, and there's no indication that it's ever been updated. So yeah, the other annoying thing is the top review on Amazon is somebody who gave it like a 1-star review saying it's terrible, it doesn't cover anything, and nothing works in it. And I'm like, oh, okay, I don't understand that, but whatever. Whatever floats your boat, or weird flex, but okay. I'm so cool because I know all those things. Anyways, let me glance really quick. Yeah, Hans says he does ELK for a living. That's a book on itself. Yeah, it's funny. The section in the book on ELK is a very small example of what you can do with it. And I actually ran in production in a Kubernetes cluster a pretty big, beefy Elasticsearch, Fluentd, and Kibana, so EFK setup. inside of Kubernetes, and we ended up pouring tons of resources into it. I think the persistent volumes for the cluster that we had were up to like 3 or 4 terabytes at some point. And I don't know how that project's going anymore because we kind of moved it on to someone else, and it was working, but it was getting hundreds of thousands of log messages streaming into it per minute, and it was a lot of data, and it was fun to manage. So yes, EFK and ELK, which is Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana, or you might use something other than Logstash to put logs into it. It's a common way nowadays using open source tools to get logs streaming into a system and be able to visualize the logs and see trends and things like that. So it's extremely necessary if you have multiple servers and have a bunch of applications. You could use like our syslog or other solutions like that, but EFK gives you a full stack of storing and managing and visualizing log files. Anyways, yeah, that could be its own streaming series. Elasticsearch, even just Elasticsearch could be a few episodes. So I definitely can't cover that in Ansible 101. But anyway, so please go in. There's a link in the description below me to this same Google form, and ask any questions you have about Ansible or the streaming series or anything like that. Even if you want to ask about how the series went or things like that. For the next episode, I'll also hopefully have a few stats that I can share about it that will be interesting and fun. And I want to celebrate just a little bit, I guess, because not only that, but also, at least in some parts of the world, life is getting closer to normal. There's some parts of the world that are being a little crazy and, dare I say, irresponsible with the way things are going with the current crisis. But anyway, we can celebrate a little bit, I guess. One good thing is I got food from a restaurant that I had not gotten food from for 3.5 months. And so that was kind of cool. That was for Father's Day, I got something. So anyway, fun times. I will see you guys next week. And thank you for subscribing. Thank you for supporting me on GitHub or Patreon. And hopefully if you do use Windows, or if you're needing to support Windows, you got something out of this. But like I said, go join the IRC channel, Ansible Windows, if you have specific questions, and read the documentation, because I am not the Windows expert, but I know enough to be dangerous.